All right, so on our schedule, we're going to be considering Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy this quarter, and this is week 2. We've talked about the sacrifices and the ordination of the priests, and now we're going to see what they prepared for. God told the priests, you are to understand and teach the distinction between the clean and the unclean, the profane or common and the holy, that which is appropriate to bring before God and that which is prohibited. So in our study, in this theme, we'll come to the Day of Atonement, chapter 16, very important for us. And then as time allows, we'll contrast Leviticus with Hebrews in the New Testament. They're similar, they're parallel, and yet they're quite different because what Leviticus only foreshadowed or pictured, Jesus Christ fulfilled. Here was our theme verse, chapter 11:45. I'm Yahweh, the Lord, who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus, or therefore, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And we saw that these same words are cited in 1 Peter chapter 3, around verse 13, that we are now the holy nation, the royal priesthood, set apart for God's own possession, and we are to be holy in all our behavior, just as the one who called us is holy. And we talked about, what does that mean? Well, it means we're consecrated to, and we're committed to leave behind those things that God says do not belong in our relationship with Him. So here was chapter 10:10 from last time. The priests were to make this distinction so that the sons of Israel would understand the statutes that the Lord had spoken to them through Moses. You remember the tabernacle? That was Exodus, and how it was all laid out so that inside there would be the laver for washing, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering, and then coming on into the holy place, and then the most holy place where only the high priest, Aaron, would go once a year, and that would be on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and that will be chapter 16 we'll consider today. The Israelites were laid out in order, 3 tribes on the north in their camp, 3 on the east, 3 on the south, 3 on the west, and they would move that way and then set up the tabernacle in each new location. There's an idea of what the most holy place might have been like as you went past the menorah and the other elements, showbread and so forth, that we studied. Well, let's dig right in then to chapter 11, clean and unclean creatures. What did you notice from your preparation as you looked at this chapter or this whole section? What stood out to you about the clean and unclean? Yes, very specific, down to the nitty-gritty. He's going to talk about garments. He'll talk about the warp and the woof. How many of us know what the warp and the woof are? Oh, okay, good. I looked it up. There's several things here. And one of the animals I had to try to understand. Some of the Hebrew words for these creatures, like this shafan, also called coney or rock badger. Some say it's the Hyrax syriacus. But the words in the original language might cover a broader range of animals. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like if we say cat, it could be a domestic kitten or it could be a tiger. So the Hebrew words may be rendered different ways. It's not an error in the Bible. It's the fact that these words had a different range of meaning, perhaps, than we understand it. Very, very detailed, down to the minutiae. Yes, Ron? How great the new covenant is. We don't have to do all these things. And Hebrews will say every day, every day, every day, every day. And then we'll say Jesus, once for all, did what all that piled up and repeated could never accomplish. So that raises the question, why? What are your thoughts about that? Why put them through such intricate, such cross every T, dot every I? It was a lot about faith and obedience. Would they follow what God prescribed? Or would they do, as some do today, ask why? Or try to negotiate, or try to combine some of these things, or simplify it a little bit? Chris? Chris has noted the health benefits of avoiding some, for example, fish with scales. And he said in survival training, you don't eat fish with scales because you don't know what they might contain. And you and I understand something about trichinosis and pork and some of those things. In Exodus 15:26, God told the Hebrews, if you will follow these statutes, I will put none of these diseases on you that I put on the people of Egypt. There's a book written some years ago with that title, None of These Diseases, and the thesis of the book is that when you live God's way, yes, you avoid a lot of the medical and health issues, obviously transmitted diseases, right? Things that come from addictions, things that come from a lack of moderation with eating even. And God's restrictions can be such a blessing in terms of you're less likely, it can still happen, less likely to get hypertension, high blood pressure, stroke, heart disease. I mean, there are a lot of things where when you live God's way, you don't have to deal with the consequences of disobedience, even that come in this life, alcohol, drug abuse, and so forth. Very good point. We also wonder if some of these animals were used in pagan Canaanite rituals, and there may have been some connection so that the whole theme is you're to be separate, you're to be different. You don't do what they do. And so perhaps some of these creatures played a part in the nations around them. Let's remember, and Chris made this good point too, how could Moses have known of the health benefits? He couldn't. If it had not been revealed, it's a mark of the inspiration and inerrancy, the lack of error in the Bible. We've said before that Moses was raised in Egypt. Stephen said in Acts 7 that Moses was educated in all the smarts of that culture. The University of the Sun had been the premier educational institution in Moses' day. And those folks were using snake oil and, these little tonics and superstitious things to treat various conditions. Moses, what we're reading here reads like a medical manual, doesn't it? Regarding disease and regarding clean and unclean and regarding how to diagnose and how to treat certain matters that develop. Yes, Kent? Lynn? I saw you. Yeah. Yes. God is God. These are His rules. Yes. That's right. That's right. God says you have to be baptized. That's it. Yes. Yes, going to be immersed. That's right. It's not up to you. And the whole idea of a covenant, there were two words used in Greek for a covenant. One word was a term that had to do with two parties sitting down and working out the arrangement. That word never appears in the New Testament. The word that does appear is related to that one, but it's a one-sided. It's where the boss comes in and says, here's the deal. And you can either say yes and live by it and survive, or you can say no, I don't think so, and you can perish, be vanquished. Very good point. Now, you notice too, if you lived in that time and you were among the people of Israel, wouldn't you almost have to think about this stuff all the time? From the moment you get up in the morning, okay, what do we offer today? What do we do? Check the calendar, honey. Check the barn. You see, what does God require? Wouldn't it be on your mind continually? What about us? How often should we think about consecration to God? Separation from the world? Distinctiveness? Well, we don't have all those things they had. We have this and this and this. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we can narrow down our relationship to God to a few events, certain days and certain matters. But it's evident that holiness is a way of life. Remember 1 Peter 1:13, be holy yourselves in all your behavior. Colossians 3:17, whatever you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Great? Pick up the cross daily. Yes. 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 Good. Greg's talked about everyone has the same amount of time. How much of our time we spend on this or this or this shows our priorities. The New Testament also makes it clear that holiness is part of everything you do. So it's not like Monday, I'm going to work. I can't be holy today. No, Monday work is your sacrifice to God. Is that right? You heard the word vocation? Vocation means your calling. You are where you are in the workplace because your light is shining and you're living a distinctive, God-glorifying life. The same is true of your vacation. The same is true when you're working on your house or you're talking with your neighbors or getting your car fixed or recovering from a car wreck or whatever. It's all devoted to God. So it's not like, oh no, I got to make more of my time. I can't do any of these things. No, it's the whole picture. And Paul was certainly that way, as you noted. Right? Okay, so here are the land animals, the split hoofs and chewed the cud. And again, God doesn't explain why. It's very important. He tells them what, but he doesn't try to persuade them. This is really better for you because of this or this or this. This is it. God is God. Then the fish, the clean, had both fins and scales, no shellfish, and no eels. All right? So birds, there are 20, most of them meat eaters. And again, back to Chris's point, perhaps scavengers. And if you were to take of one of these birds, you might get whatever they had just eaten. That's kind of disgusting. Isn't it good you could eat crickets? You know, after friend builders today, how about it? Grasshoppers, locusts? Who do you think about with locusts? Eating locusts. Grasshoppers. John the Baptist, don't you? And back to Chris' survival, right? Things that people eat, such as these particular winged insects. So are they best when they're crunchy? Anybody have a recipe? With chocolate covered. Oh my. Isn't it fascinating? The things that we're accustomed to eating we think are good. But that which maybe other people eat, which is quite acceptable, we think, oh, I've never had that before. All right, so then how do people become unclean? Well, they might have contact with an unclean animal or swarming things or even the carcasses of clean animals. The animal itself, you could have eaten it if you had killed it and prepared it, but once it's dead, notice again the danger that you and I are familiar with that they would not have known except for God's direction. And I believe if they hadn't followed these rules, they very likely would have all been exterminated in the wilderness. And to me, the fact that there is a people of Israel today is absolute proof that the Bible is the Word of God. They could not have made it through this experience. Anything else you want to know or ask? Okay, so look at chapter 11. Here's verse 3, divides a hoof and chews the cud. Verse 4, not to eat of these. The camel, is that very appetizing? Maybe not. The shafan, this Bible says, we talked about. The rabbit, the pig. And then verse 9, these are those that you may eat in the water, have fins and scales. The others are to be abhorrent to you, verse 11. They're not just something that you could do without. They're to be detestable. They're to be awful. They're to be repulsive to you. And so the birds, again, the Hebrew words may be rendered in various ways, but they're listed. Verse 20, the winged insects. Interesting, verse 18, this Bible says the carrion vulture. Definitely, you can see the connection there from a health standpoint. Other winged insects, except for the ones named, are detestable. And then starting at 24, unclean animals. Here's what you do. Verse 28, if you picked up their carcasses, you wash your clothes, you're unclean until evening. They're unclean to you. We need to specify that unclean does not mean sinful. And sometimes when Leviticus talks about needing to be purified, it may even use the word atonement, and we automatically think someone has disobeyed God. No, not necessarily. We're going to see in chapter 12 when a woman gives birth, and it says that she's unclean. That's not a matter of anything wrong that a married woman has done, but because of the blood flow, and the Bible is very emphatic about matters related to the blood. Okay, so anything else, chapter 11? Okay. Unclean carcasses, yes. Yes. The Nazirite vow. Yes, the Nazirite vow, that was, we'll come to that in Numbers chapter 6, is an even more restrictive set of rules that one might choose to take on. Okay, so swarming things, we talked about that. Here, the rationale we've given. The reason it's not given, or this, here's the none of these diseases. All that's true. All that's true. But that is not used as a rationale in Leviticus, as true as it is. It's, you're holy, this is what God says, eat this, don't eat that. We sometimes call these kosher rules, right? You know that term? We need to remember that these were specific for that nation and that time. So if you look in your Bible at Mark 7, this is where people are questioning Jesus' disciples because they don't wash their hands ceremonially before they eat. And Jesus says it's not what goes into the body, remember that? It's not what comes in the mouth it's what starts in the heart. What starts in the heart. The defilement starts on the inside, Jesus said. And so Mark 7:19 has a little parenthesis inspired that says, thus he declared all foods clean. What's going on in Acts 10? Yeah, Peter, the big sheet coming down. And who's knocking at the door while that happens? Men from Cornelius, the Roman centurion, Gentile. And what time of day is it? Lunchtime. Yes. Did I mention friend builders yet? Oh. It was lunchtime, and Peter's on the roof of the house, and he's hungry. I mean, he goes into this trance, and he starts dreaming. And God uses that. And what does the voice say about all those creatures? Rise, kill, and eat. And Peter's response? Never, it's unclean. So take 2, same command, same response, and take 3. And while Peter's still wondering, there's kind of this knock at the door. And the Spirit tells Peter that that's what this is all about. And so Peter says later in Acts 10 to Cornelius, around verse 34, 35, God has shown me that I'm not to call any man unclean. Peter made the connection between what was on the sheet and the fact that he was not to be prejudiced, he was not to discriminate, he was not to show favoritism for or against anyone. Anything else on that? Okay. All right. So here's kind of an image I found about animals that are clean and animals that are unclean. Notice the word abomination there. So now we come to childbearing mothers. And I've tried to underline ritually unclean, not a matter of sin. So if it's a male child, she's unclean for 7 days. Then the circumcision of that boy would be on the 8th day. If the child was a girl, then she would be unclean for 14 days. We're not told why the distinction. Then she enters 33 days for the boy, 66 days for the girl, as she's being purified. In a sense, she's no longer unclean like she was. That was the 7 or 14 days. But there still seems to be a process of her being completely purified. So she brings a burnt offering and a sin offering. I put a question mark. She has not sinned. The Bible seems to be describing that which she is to present, and not saying that a married woman did anything wrong to have a child. So the priest makes atonement, and she needs to be reunited, reconciled, reconnected with the community and be able to be part of the fellowship of Israel again. Dave? Is this the first time we're told that she, female, was to bring a burnt offering and a sin offering? I'm checking our panel of experts here. Earlier in what we've read, the first 10 chapters, where the term he was used, was it used in a generic sense, or was it used males only? Or was it used even for the male representing either himself or his family? It's a good question. I think this is the first time I recall. Okay, good. Dave said he's looked for it. This is the first mention of a woman bringing an offering. Interesting also that she brings it and not her husband. But again, it seems to be a matter of the loss of blood. The Bible holds a very highest regard. You don't mess with the blood. You don't eat it. When you're preparing an animal, you drain it all out. And whenever there's a blood flow from a person, you treat that very, very carefully. So, and then the matter of the less expensive animal, if she can't afford this or that, and remember we noted about Jesus, that Joseph and Mary were on the poor side. And so they brought birds rather than the more valuable offering. Anything else you want to notice about the childbearing mothers? Okay. Verse 8 is if she cannot afford the lamb, then 2 turtle doves, 2 young pigeons, one for burnt offering, other for a sin offering. And again, there's the word atonement, suggesting that she needs to be reconciled with the faith community in worship and in fellowship and those things. She has not sinned, but she is isolated for this length of time. Well, that brings us then to leprosy. One of the most important things to note is that when we hear leprosy, we think of what's called Hansen's disease. And we think of, the bones, the nerves, the deterioration, the contagious terminal condition. The Hebrew term, once again, could carry more things than that. And we're going to see in a moment, the Bible will even speak of a garment having leprosy. How could a garment have a skin? Well, it doesn't. But things in a garment that might resemble leprosy on the skin are included in this term. So this is what I was able to find. Psoriasis, hives, these crust-like things. Leukodermia literally means white skin, white patches. It's an indefinite, it's a general word. Might be swelling, might be eruption, or might be a spot. Not necessarily Hansen's disease. So I don't know if you have a question about that. Just keep it in mind. So you have in the beginning of the chapter sort of an exam. Someone said, well, was the high priest like a doctor? In a sense, yes. And we talked about a medical manual. This is what he would follow. And he says this. Kind of like a doctor would say, does it hurt here? Yes. Why do you know? And he would test it out. But the high priest did not prescribe a treatment. They didn't have like medication. There wasn't some cure for it. You watch it. If it's this, you do that. If it's different, then here's the response to it. So look at verse 3. If the hair in the infection is turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin, then it's leprosy. He's pronounced unclean. But if it's white on the skin of his body, it's not deeper than the skin, hair on it has not turned white, then just isolate. Watch him for 7 days, or her, and then check him again. And so if you need to, verse 5, 7 more days. And then verse 6, check again. And then perhaps it's only a scab, this Bible says in verse 6. So what does the man do? Wash his clothes, and he's clean. But if the scab keeps spreading, he comes back, and he may be unclean. It's leprosy. And so verse 10, white swelling in the skin, turning the hair white, quick raw flesh in the swelling. It's a chronic leprosy. He doesn't isolate him. I thought that was unusual. Why not? And I understand he doesn't need to be isolated because you already know he's unclean. The isolation would be to give it a little time and see what it does. It get worse or better or stay the same. You don't need that in this case. He's definitely unclean. And so verse 12, what if it covers all the skin from his head to his feet? Then it's all turned white and he's clean. What did that mean? I mean, it's all over. And so he's clean. We might have thought the opposite. So verse 16, if the raw flesh turns back to white, come to the priest. If it's turned to white, he can be pronounced clean. Then verse 18 goes on with the boil. Following that, a burn. Next, an infection on the head or chin. Bright spots, this white thing we talked about, or infection on a bald head. So if you lived in Israel, what was one advantage of being bald? Come on, men, this is your turn. Oh, you wouldn't have dandruff, that's true. It would be easier to tell if something was going on up here. And you know what they say, some heads God made beautiful, what's the rest of it? Others he covered with hair, have you ever heard that? So it would be more evident if something was going on the bald head. Yes. Good, God knows the number of hairs on our head, and he doesn't have so much to keep up with. That's true. Someone says you get older, they either turn gray or turn loose, right? Yeah. Now, you're familiar with 45 and 46, where if you were leprous, you might then, with others sharing your condition, you're outside the camp, you tear your clothes, you uncover the hair of your head and your mustache, and you cry, unclean, unclean. And as long as you have the infection, you're banished, you're excluded. You can't come in. So you remember Luke 17, Jesus is going along between Samaria and Galilee. And here he meets a group of 10 lepers. And I always like to say that it didn't matter anymore whether you were a Jew or Samaritan. All those ethnic, racism, all that stuff, whatever, that doesn't matter anymore. You got leprosy. And I think in the church, it's a great message for us that sinners are sinners. It doesn't matter. So many of the things that people make a big deal about on the outside. But anyway, they start crying out. And so they're isolated. So in that case, the leper would lose his family, he would lose his livelihood, he would lose his home. Anything else about leper? Oh, do you remember the lepers in the time of the kings? They came across the camp. The chapter's not coming to me right now, but where the lepers found the camp, enemy's camp had been abandoned. And somebody find that for us and tell us where it is. And so the lepers find the enemy's gone, and they find all the provisions there. And the lepers start enjoying it. And they say, this is wrong. We can't keep this to ourselves. This is a day of good news. And so they send the word back, and we talk about sharing the gospel. There's a feast. Hey, we can't just enjoy this ourselves. And so, did anybody find it for us? You can look up, if you have your phone out. It's okay to use your phone, by the way. This is a day of good news. Look that up. This is a day of good news, the Bible. And raise your hand when you find it. Okay? So, leprous garments. Here's the point I made earlier. Woven material could have something that looked like leprosy and was therefore to be dealt with seriously. So the warp, see if this is right. Threads running lengthwise. The woof, threads running crosswise. Yes? Good. I was thinking 7, but 2 Kings chapter 7. Thank you. 2 Kings 7 is about the lepers. Got to share this bounty that God's given us. Good. So here were the things you diagnosed, and here's what you did with it. If it is spread, you burn it. It's a woven material. If not, and spread, wash it and keep checking it. You know, how did Moses know all of this, you see? You could tear the old part out and keep the rest of it, maybe repair it. Okay. Anybody else on the garments? Okay. So chapter 14, how do you come back in? We'll call this readmission. Well, you brought 2 live birds, cedar, scarlet yarn, hyssop. Hyssop was a plant that you could use to make like a brush for cleaning things. And you remember when Jesus was on the cross, they put the sour wine on a branch of hyssop and lifted it up to him? So you kill the first bird, you sprinkle blood, you release the second bird, and then you wash and you shave completely. Shave all your hair. Offerings are brought, and then you're restored. Again, the poorer people could substitute something else. And then 33 to 57, I didn't go into detail, but it's amazing about infected houses. Infected houses. I found that interesting because in the wilderness, they would have lived in tents. Do you think about that? So some of these laws must also pertain to their life in the new land. Mold and mildew and fungus. Those are still difficult to deal with, aren't they? Okay, so bodily discharges, males and females. So something abnormal from a disease, you know, you got to be careful for where that person sleeps, the bed, the seat, the body, that person's spit, or the saddle on which they ride their animals. So again, so meticulous and so detailed, and from where we stand, so accurate about avoiding the spread of such things, though the reason is not given. Okay? Normal male matters, that's described as well. Female, if it's the normal, is uncleanness. It's not because there's anything wrong with that. It's this matter of the blood, right? And so if it's abnormal, then it's unclean as long as it lasts. And then 31 to 33 gives such a severe warning regarding the penalty. And so it's very, very important. Verse 31, thus you shall keep the sons of Israel separated. What's the theme of our book? Holiness, distinction, consecration, set apart, so that they will not die. They would defile the tabernacle. You see, that's the reason given. The tabernacle was devoted to the worship of God, and everything was to be holy. Well, I'm going to move on. I think we can do some of the Day of Atonement. Did you get the email I sent out? Should have come into your email Saturday. If you're not getting those, let me know, and let me be sure to send them to you. But here's kind of an outline, and then I took this from a study Bible, sort of the order of things that would be done on the Day of Atonement. I'll let you look at those while I mention that there would be 2 animals. One would be put to death because the price of sin was the shedding of blood. In order for man to become at one, atonement, for man to become at one with God, there had to be the shedding of blood. The other animal was the scapegoat, or the goat of escape, and the priest would lay his hands on that goat, confess the sins of the people as if it were some kind of transfer, symbolically, to the goat, and then send it away. Jesus Christ, of course, is both. He's both the one that died, shedding blood for our sin, and he's one that carries our sins away. So don't have time to go through all of these, but you can see them. They should come out again tomorrow in the Monday email that Nona sends. Okay, all the preparation the high priest had to do in order to be clean himself so that he could come into the presence of God on behalf of unclean people. I encourage you to read Hebrews 7 through 10. In the old time, many priests, they could never get the job done. Jesus Christ, once for all. His term never ends. He is the eternal high priest for the people of God. Repeated sacrifices, just one on the cross. Those priests died. That's why you had to replenish them, not Jesus. Priests took blood, not their own. Obviously, a priest didn't take his own blood. Jesus Christ took his own blood. Hebrews said that Jesus' sacrifice cleanses the conscience, cleanses us on the inside, and not just ceremonially. So those were shadows, those were facsimiles. The tabernacle, Hebrews 8, was a copy of what Moses saw in heaven. So everything they did was a parallel. It was a picture. It was something that by doing this, they were to imagine that and ultimately realize the futility and the frustration and the ineffectiveness of all of this. Why did God put them through that? Perhaps so that they'd learn that very lesson. We can't do it. We do this over and over. We're still not right with God. We still don't have the kind of assurance and blessing and peace and joy that we want to have. And so as the Old Testament unfolds, God says, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And all of that was to prepare them so that they would appreciate the Christ when he came. So the next section is what's sometimes called the Holiness Code, and it's the rest of Leviticus. The Holiness Code, these are the ways that you behave as you're committed to being God's holy people. Remember friend builders today? Also, there are cards in the box in the back. If you can't join us for friend builders, take some of those cards. They're already stamped for you and drop them in the mail. Thanks for being with us today and for your participation.